Hello to my beloved students and welcome. I really appreciate your patience for this first class of week 10 as I sort of gear up for a couple of days of interviews and research presentations that we're going to miss one day of in-person learning, but I'm really going to try to make sure in these two videos that I cover the core content that we're going to need to have an effective game session on class 2 of week 10. Those of you who've had office hours with me before know that I'm usually accompanied by my one-eyed pit bull Molly, who follows me everywhere. She doesn't usually contribute much to class content, but who knows, maybe she'll bark at the UPS man somewhere halfway in the middle of this video. All right, in this first video, what I just want to do is go over some of the core administrative content, kind of like we do usually in the beginning of our classes where I say like, here's the sort of deadlines and things coming up that you need to know. Now, this week's class is all about the resurrection date, specifically the day in which Christians in the 4th century were going to celebrate the death and then the resurrection of Christ. That might seem like a relatively persnickety issue, like what's the big deal, right? Let's just pick a date and get on with it. But actually, as I'll talk about in my next video, the specific date itself opens up or sort of represents a microcosm of many other issues, like how closely aligned with Judaism should Christianity be? Or is it more important to satisfy Western Christians or Eastern Christian practices? I won't get into the details much more of that here, but when you're done with this quick admin video, definitely go check out that one because it'll get us into the intricacies, the meat of the history that we'll be debating for our next class session. So yeah, that's game session 4 coming up. In terms of administrative stuff, here are the 3 big things I'd like to go over in this video. First, a couple of upcoming deadlines just to know, sort of what's on the docket, as well as my own grading and what's sort of coming our way. Next, I'd like to quickly go over who's speaking because I don't want anyone to be taken totally by surprise on our next live class. And then finally, just to give everybody a heads up about what are the main topics or the procedures going to be for game session 4. We've been on the creed now for so long that it's sort of nice to be able to move on, but what are we moving on to? So my first piece of advice for us as we head into the last half of the semester is don't lose steam. When you think about it, we really only have about 6-7 weeks left, right? It's not as much as the first half of the semester. But these last couple weeks, especially as the weather warms up, tend to be the weeks in which people start to fall off, skip assignments, miss perusals. Really try to hang in there. And if you feel like you're getting swamped or sort of drowning in work, definitely reach out to me, right? That's what I'm here for. Especially next week. After all my research junk is over, it's going to be nice to just take other things off my docket and focus solely on my students. Now, in terms of deadlines and things kind of coming up, I have some good news in progress and a couple other little things for you to be aware of as we go. So first of all, yay, my midterm grading is done. I have entered the scores into Blackboard, and we will definitely go over them. I'm going to hand them all back out on our next class meeting and go over slowly the answers, and you can ask me any questions or debate any topics that you want to. My speech paper grading is very much in progress. By the time you watch this video, I'm hoping to be done with most of the first session speakers, and my real goal is by our next live class to have everybody's first speech paper done. If you were game session 3 and you haven't yet submitted your paper, please really try to do so by early this week, this upcoming week. It'll be helpful so that you can kind of know where you stand grade-wise before starting the second bigger paper. Other little deadlines before I talk about speakers for the next class. I think our 3rd and final short writing assignment is coming up in week 9, so check the syllabus for that. And then I think we've got another test coming up. I can't quite remember, probably at week 11 or 12. So just keep those in the back of your mind. Also, this week, this upcoming class week, week 10, is the last week to drop this class with a W. I think Friday is the final deadline. So if you're sort of at the point where you're convinced you're not going to pass and like that you're not going to be able to rally, definitely have a conversation with me and let's think about whether trying to stick it out for these last few weeks or whether withdrawing is the better path. But please know I'm here to be an advocate and a friend as you weigh those options. Okay, in terms of who is speaking in game session 4, if you're in my O1 class, we're going to start with Haley as Constantine, of course, and the same in my O2 class, Ira as Constantine. You both will give the first speeches. And then we'll hear from a variety of other figures, both indeterminates, but also some Arians, and I think at least one Alexandrian in the mix here. It's going to be kind of nice for our debate not to center quite so much on Arians versus Alexandrians. We really went head to head between those two factions on the topic of the creed, but from here on out, perspectives get a lot more diverse. If your name is on one of those lists, please make sure to try to get me a draft within the next 48 hours so I can get you some feedback before your big speech. And just like the first time, the draft is worth 5 points of the total paper. Okay, the next question I want to address is what's the core sort of organizing structure and the topics of our next game session, just so that everybody's on the same page, because again, we're sort of moving on from the creed and need to have a sense of where we're headed to. So game session 4 actually starts with the official signing of the creed. Typically it begins with Constantine giving a speech about the importance of the creed process and why he as emperor wants to see all of the bishops sign the creed. I will bring with me a hard copy paper, formal looking version of the creed with its full wording, and then all of the bishops will sort of line up in a long socially distanced row, and each of you will have to decide whether or not to sign it. Now, I'm going to send around by email the complete text of the creed as you have it. Unfortunately, there is no more time to debate its intricacies. Wherever we end in game session 3, that's what the creed will look like. I'm not going to tell you at this stage whether I think it's a more Arian or a more Alexandrian creed. It's really up to each of you to look at your own character sheets and decide for yourself, does this creed match the objectives of my character? And if yes, perhaps sign it. But if no, how much of a risk are you going to take that if you don't sign it, you might get excommunicated? Or what potential consequences would there be? Now, I want to clarify that not signing the creed does not mean you are out of the game immediately or that you're sort of instantly excommunicated. Constantine does have the power to excommunicate anyone who doesn't sign the creed if he chooses to exert that authority. Or the council could pass a law that says that anybody who doesn't sign the creed is now going to lose their bishop status. But that's a debate that's sort of up to you guys to have, right? It's on each bishop to determine for himself or herself whether or not they want to sign the creed as it stands. And again, I will send around by email the full text of our creed so that you can really think it over by the time you come to class. I would say that you should know by the time you come to class that day whether you're planning to sign the creed or not, and maybe 1 or 2 reasons why or why not. You might want to, however, keep an open mind in case Constantine gives a really powerful speech or somebody else in the class is really able to persuade you one way or another. But you should know from your character sheet perspective, does it help me or hurt me to sign this creed and why? All right, after we've done Constantine's speech and the signing of the creed, we're then going to proceed to our other main debate topics. Now, because the creed is behind us, we have a little bit more flexibility on what we want to talk about. The main topic is, of course, fixing a date for the resurrection. And my second YouTube video will get into the content, the intricacies of that. But we also now have time to start opening up the Council of Nicaea to other niche proposals. So, for example, whether or not women should be permitted to have leadership roles in the church. Or many of the indeterminates and some of you in the various factions have other niche proposals. I don't think, for example, that we have yet voted on the question of whether or not Jerusalem should become the new sort of capital of the Christian Roman Empire. I will send around an email along with the creed and a document with all of the sort of outstanding topics for us to vote on. Both of my class sections have quite a few rosters of things that haven't yet been fully voted on or agreed. So there's a lot to fit in here. But this is a good time for you guys to start going through your character sheets and saying, okay, now that the creed is behind us, what are the other topics that are a part of my own victory objectives? And what sort of arguments would I need to make in order to get myself there? You may, of course, if you wish, include in your speeches or speak impromptu about the signing of the creed. For example, if you are set to give a speech that day and you didn't sign the creed, you might want to start your speech by talking about why. But the time for debate about the creed itself or its authority is sort of behind us, except for the future question of whether or not it should be enforceable, right? If we have a third of the class or half the class that doesn't sign the creed, anybody could really bring up for debate or propose as a canon whether or not the creed should be enforceable, broadly speaking, within the church. Okay, I think we've hit that. Feel free to sort of send me an email or a message if you have any other questions about these. Now, I think one question I got more than any other in the first half of this class is like, OMG, I have to write a speech. What should it be about? So I want to try to consolidate for everybody in one quick slide, like based on who you are, what should your speech look like and how might you want to go about organizing it? So if you are Constantine, your speech is going to be pretty straightforward. It should be a speech to encourage people to sign the creed, right? That was the whole point of Constantine gathering the Council of Nicaea, was to try to achieve some consensus about the core beliefs and what Christians should, sort of espouse to within their faith. So if you're Constantine, you're going to want to deliver a speech that encourages people to sign and maybe indicate what action you are or are not planning to take if they don't sign. You don't have to address that. You can kind of keep it as a secret in your back pocket if you prefer, but it might help to be explicit. For those of you who are supposed to give speeches in game session 4, please check your character sheet to see, does your character have a strong view on the date of the resurrection? If you do one way or another, that should be the core topic of your paper. What you think the date should be, but also its broader relationship to Judaism, right? To the recruitment of pagans, to whether or not that date is truly accurate in accordance with the Gospels and whether or not that matters. For more detail on this, really see my second video, which goes into detail on all these things. There are perhaps a few of you, though, who do not have a strong stance on the resurrection date topic. If that's you, if your character sheet says you do not have a strong view on the resurrection, or it's just not mentioned, then you can really pick any of your other objectives to try to propose, right? Your niche canons, your niche proposals, things that are of interest to you specifically. But I would say that whatever you choose, you should not pick on the topic of metropolitan bishops, because that's the core topic for next week. So you don't want to kind of jump the gun on that. The second thing I want to touch on briefly is the organization of speeches. I have to say I was really impressed in the first round by most of the speeches people gave. They were really robust, they were thoughtful, they made good use of evidence. But just as a sort of tip for everybody thinking about their second speech, here's my sort of paradigm of what I think an effective debate paper should look like. So in your first 1 to 2 paragraphs, don't skip the step of reminding us who you are. Most people in the class are not going to remember your individual place or even name or proposals. So give us a recap, right? Remind us who you are in 1 to 2 paragraphs, but also maybe reflect on how is the Council of Nicaea going for you specifically? How would St. Nicholas think about the Council of Nicaea? How would Arius feel like the council is going? Right? Remind people, what is your perception or attitude? In the next 2 paragraphs, that's where you really want to put the bulk of your argument. Like, what is the topic you want to bring to the council's attention and why? This is the place in your speech where you really want to support your ideas with examples, drawing from maybe the Gospels or past history. We've just finished the midterm. You guys now know a lot of history you can draw upon. Finally, in your closing 2 paragraphs, here is really where you want to make it explicit. Like, what is it you want the council to do with your arguments? Maybe you've just made a really important speech on the fact that the resurrection needs to be linked with the equinox. You want to be able to point to the board and say, this is my canon, to vote that The resurrection date from here on out will always be aligned with the spring equinox. Or if you want to make a proposal that women should be allowed to be bishops, I urge you, O fellow bishops in the Council of Nicaea, to support my law that women be given these opportunities to become clergy within the church. Whatever it is that you're arguing for, don't leave the council hanging or ambiguous about what it is you want. Similarly with Constantine, right? You want to end your speech making it really explicit what you want out of the bishops. All right, 15 minutes is plenty long on administrative stuff. I'm going to stop here. But again, feel free to shoot me emails if you have questions. If you are supposed to be giving a speech in the next game session, then definitely get me that draft within the next 2 days. Okay, see you guys soon.